In this third section, we will look at three major theoretical perspectives within sociology. First, I'd like to start out with defining two important terms. The first term is theory. Theory is seen as a general and systematic explanation of a social phenomena. And to be more specific, it is a scientific explanation of the relationship between at least two elements, how they relate to each other, and these two elements in scientific studies are called dependent and independent variables. So again, theory trying to explain relationship between at least two elements, two variables, and how they're related to each other. And the way, an analogy that I usually use to explain what a theory is kind of like a torch that allows everyone to see things in a room, right? And so a torch is not only for me to see what's in the room, in a dark room, but for everyone to see it. On the other hand, paradigm is more. It's very similar to a theory, but it's more specific. It's like a pair of glasses that only I can use and only help me to when I put them on to see things clearer. But other people in the room who are not wearing the glasses, the pair of glasses, can't see how these glasses are useful and how they can use the glasses to see things clearer. So a paradigm is the frameworks within a discipline like sociology, psychology, biology, and so on. They're the frameworks that are used within a discipline to formulate, test, and measure theories. So paradigms contribute to the development of theories. So these two definitions are detailed in your book, and sometimes they're used interchangeably. So for example, the next three sociological paradigms that we'll discuss, functionalism, conflict theory, and SI, symbolic interactionism. So these are all sociological paradigms. But as you can see, sometimes the word theory is used, such as conflict theory, which is a paradigm, right? So I know this may be a little bit confusing for you, and it's okay, but just be aware that these are paradigms, and the functionalism, conflict theory, so, right, as well as SI, and sometimes the word paradigm and theory are used interchangeably because, again, the paradigm is used to build a theory. So if it becomes a theory, that means more people, outside of sociology, for example, recognize the paradigm, right? So at which point it's no longer a paradigm, right? Paradigm is only within a particular discipline, but once it becomes more universally accepted by other people, then it becomes a theory. So again, keep the distinction in your mind, and also recognize sometimes they're used interchangeably because paradigm is used to build theory. Okay? All right. So let's look at the first paradigm, right? Functionalism, which looks at society from a macro perspective, at the institutional level, for example. And a classical theorist, sociologist, who was very important in laying the foundation for functionalism. And by the way, functionalism also includes structural functionalism. They're slightly different from each other, but for the sake of our class, we are going to see them as pretty much almost the same. Okay, so Emily Durkheim played a very important role in laying the foundation of functionalism, and so again, here is the picture of our society, right? So from a macro perspective would be from society looking inward, or from just looking at society from a big level, such as institutions, institutional levels. So functionalism emphasizes interdependence, right, of different parts in our society working together, cooperating with each other, exchanging services and goods. And in order to do that, in order to cooperate, exchange our goods and services with each other, there needs to be trust, which serve as a social bonds for us. And so one way is to visualize this paradigm is functionalism, is that functionalism sees society like a human body, which has media as an institution, like, as well as family, as well as religion, education, and government, among many other institutions. So, like our body, we need different parts of our body in order to fully function well. We need our left hand, right hand, our legs, both legs, our head, and so on, right? And let's say when one of our hands is not, working, it's broken, right? So let's say our family, right? Family and society, when a society do not have fully healthy families, that society can, people in that society can still survive, but that society is not as healthy as it were to have all the institutions, including the family, to function at its, healthiest level, right? So like myself, right, if my right hand's broken, I can still write with my left hand. It's just a little bit cumbersome, right? A little bit annoying, right? Now, imagine society, having two institutions that are dysfunctional, families as well as religion, okay? Oh, that's a little bit harder to function well. So like myself, if both my right and left hands are not fully functioning well, it's extremely difficult for me to write. In fact, I may have to ask someone to write for me, right? So again, within functionalism, right, it sees different parts of society working together, helping each other in order for society to thrive, in order for everyone to live well. And in order to do that, we all need each other and help each other out. Like the different parts of our body. We need the different parts of our body in order to fully function well as a human being. Okay, next theory is, or paradigm is conflict theory. It was highly influenced by Karl Marx, and he looks at society from a macro perspective. So that is, from looking at institutions, for example, looking at a social level rather than looking at individual level. And the way he sees society is that it is made up of competition and conflicts for limited resources. This competition, conflicts occur between particularly groups of people who have unequal access to limited resources. So between the haves and have-not. So an analogy for this, for the conflict theory, is to see society like a league table, sport league table. So where all the different sport teams from below number one, right? They all want to be number one, and so they're all competing with each other in order to be in number one position. And if you're in number one position, you want to make sure that you will stay as number one for as long as possible. So, and you want to capitalize on that position as number one. So, for example, being number one, you'll probably have a lot of money. So you'll make sure you buy all the best players out there. So that way, when you play the next game, you will win the championship again, right? Number one, people, when you're in the number one group, right, or number one team, you have more resources, more influence, more power to stay number one, while the other groups that have not, they're all trying to, of course, replace number one. They're competing, to be number one, so that way they can have more access to resources, such as money, influence, as well as prestige. Okay, the next important sociological paradigm or theory is SI, Symbolic Interactionism, which was heavily influenced by Max Weber. And unlike Marx and Emily Durkheim, he studies society at the micro level. So he looks at individuals, right? me, you, how we relate to each other, and as a result, how we shape society. So he focuses on the symbols that people use to connect to each other, to relate to each other, and the meanings that each of us attach to these symbols, okay? And how they, as a result of these meanings, how the symbols help shape how each individual see himself or herself and how they relate to each other. So a way to to represent this perspective is a play, right, where you see people performing, right, for the audience, and they're also performing for each other, right, and they are using certain symbols to represent their emotion, to convey certain messages to each other on the stage as well as to those in the audience, so that way the people in the audience understand what the actors are trying to say, are trying to express. So here is a table that gives you a nice summary of these three sociological paradigms. This is based on the table that's in our book. So in functionalism, the level of analysis is macro, and the focus is on the way different parts of society function together. In conflict theory, which also takes the macro level of analysis, instead of focusing on cooperation, working together, and exchanging with each other, it emphasizes power differential, right? Inequalities among different groups of people, and in part because they're trying to compete for limited resources. And lastly is SI, Symbolic Interactionism, which looks at micro level, and they focus on symbols and the meanings that are attached to these symbols, and how they can convey in one-on-one interactions.